Hi everybody, and welcome to our prep video for our second workshop, the timeline mapping workshop, where we'll give you a little bit of support and framework options for looking at the historical assessment aspect of your background research. So as we had talked about earlier, we're taking an evidence-based approach here, and that requires that we gather the intelligence necessary to understand the dynamics of the question that you're pursuing an answer to, right? And it begins with our framing lens, right? The challenge of really asking a clear and crisp question that is open-ended enough, that is not set to put you on a predictive path, but more of an anticipatory pathway. And then once you have defined the boundaries of that framing lens, then we get into the various layers of background research and evidence gathering that we've been talking about and working on, right? And the goal here is to understand the system dynamics and where the system has come from, such that we understand the drivers of change and signals of what might interrupt the patterns of change that we have seen historically. And with these aspects in hand, we have a pretty solid understanding of our topic, the question we seek answers to, the boundaries of the question, where it's come from, who are the stakeholders involved, and how did the system get to where it is, and give us a glimpse of what are the forces and other aspects of change that are leaning on the system looking forward. That puts us in a position to do our baseline forecasting, which is our least disruptive forecast, followed by more disruptive forecasts that are lead us to alternative trajectories for the forces that we're looking at, which allow us to tell the narratives that become the scenarios, taking an evidence-based and expert-informed point of view, right? And so the two steps in the background research process that we've been talking about, you're well aware of the systems analysis, right? Not looking at how it behaves necessarily, but rather why does the system behave the way it does. And you guys had a great workshop the other day and looked at things like stakeholders and forces of change and system boundaries and things of that nature. And in our next workshop, we're going to look back to look forward, right? And the idea that understanding how the system has evolved to get to where it is can give us some real insight into how it might behave in the future. So let's go ahead and get started. I love this quote from Mark Twain, right? It basically says the future is not necessarily going to look like the past has, right? That the future may be very different, but there may be some patterns and other dynamics that give us an understanding of how it might behave, right? So it may not be a direct repeat, but it might look similar in a lot of aspects, right? And so when we look at historical analysis and the forces of change and the other dynamics of change that are unfolding, of course, we begin with looking at continuous change, right? Those patterns of change that are observable, that generally are on a continuation trajectory. We can find data, we can gather that data, even model it and project it into the future. But equally important, we look for the signals of disruption, right? So and we know this from our dynamics of change class, that we look at wildcards and we look at tipping points that come from exponential change. And then we look at criticality, right? Those are systems under pressure. And where do we find the signals of that? Well, it comes from the debates and issues that are driving our discourse in politics and society and that sort of thing. That's where we find the systems that are under pressure. And so using those as a glimpse to where disruption can come from, then we look to define the causes of the disruption, the transition, and then the definition of the new era, right? And really having an understanding of the eras that come from the continuous and discontinuous change and the transition between them That's the depth that we seek to understand. So we've got a framework that I want you to gain some familiarity working with, and here's what it is. It's called timeline mapping, and essentially we understand where we are in the present, and now we're trying to gain a sense of where we've come from in the past. Now, in your framing and your systems assessment, you've put yourself in a pretty good position to understand and categorize the forces of change, right? That you've got some clarity on the framing of your topic, such that your categories of change, your X, Y, and Z, that are defined in your still fairly rigorous framing of your central question, and the categorization of the forces of change that are making it into your force field assessment, are defined, and you can understand those. And so what we want to do is, using those categories, look back, take a walk back in time and ask how those things have unfolded, with the intent that we can understand where was continuous change in basically in control, and when did the disruptions come along that led to a transition from a prior era to the next era. And so this is the outcome of historical timeline mapping, is to have clarity on what were the eras that have come and gone, and that's the purpose of it, right? So a little bit more guidance here, right? That the intention here is to understand how the system has unfolded, but really we want to add some context to that. And a general rule of thumb is that what we want to do is look about twice as far back as we intend to look forward, right? And the prototypical benchmark for a foresight project is 10 years. Now, you're not necessarily prescribed to use 10 years, but if you're using something other than 10 years, you probably want to put a little bit of justification as to why you are, right? But if indeed you are using a 10-year time horizon, then we want to look back at least 20 years to get some context. And again, what we want to do is see how change unfolded using the forces that we've already introduced, right? That we want to have a consistent and well-aligned discussion that lead us to understand how change is unfolded, both in terms of continuous change and then disruptions that led us from one era to the next. And really the reason that we do this is so that we can contextualize the idea that where we're going with this, the payoff is the scenarios, and scenarios are really eras of the future, right? That they come about because some sort of transition occurred that led us into a new state. And so if we understand the historical eras, it really puts us in a position to describe with meaning, with depth, what the future eras or scenarios might be. So this framework, this tool was created by friends of ours at the Stanford Foresight and Innovation Program, and they call it a Janus cone, right? So Janus was the Roman god of transitions, this God that could see both into the past and into the future at the same time. And so that's what this tool does, is it allows us to understand and articulate the past such that we can describe the future, right? And that really the takeaway in your timeline map is the transitions and eras that have occurred that bring us to the status quo, the current day. And so that's what we're looking to accomplish in this workshop. And so let's look at an example, right? So this was last summer, did some work for Microsoft Corporation, and so this is just sort of a high-level example, but so they were looking at personal computing as it is unfolded, so that they can look into the future, right? And so things that have unfolded in time, right? That it began some number of decades ago with the Intel microchip and the first personal computers and the first operating system, which was MS-DOS, and then that led to the early application software, right? Lotus 1, 2, 3, and the first word processors and that sort of thing, which created a market opportunity for what they called the clones, right? Gateway and Dell and others that used the the Intel and Windows technology to create something that was basically a consistent platform, interchangeable, and that sort of thing, which then led to the opportunity to connect these devices, right? And so networking and relational databases and things like that came about that really changed the game. And in this period of time, we called this the PC era. Suddenly, desktops had PCs, and it was pretty cool. It gave us productivity. Then we moved into a new era with the emergence of the web navigators and new opportunities to access this new thing called the internet, right? And then new productivity, search and email and other things emerged in that era, as did e-commerce, the ability to buy and acquire things and exchange value over the internet, right? Which also led to this new emergence of social networking, right? And connecting with friends and associates in an entirely new way, which then led to content sharing, right? Pictures and videos and etc., and even new types of collaboration. And so we called this era the Internet era. And because this was from Microsoft, they linked it back to a kind of a game-changing memo that Bill Gates wrote in the 1990s called the Internet Tidal Wave. And it started as a desktop phenomenon but evolved into mobile. And then a new transition came along, and that was the emergence of the cloud, right? So new cloud platforms and new software as a service sorts of things came about, new business models, sharing economy, subscription, new currency sorts of things, and even personal assistance and artificial intelligence tools sort of came along, empowered by big data and cloud access, and then even mixed reality, virtual reality sorts of things, and that this became known as the cloud era. And so you can see that it's not just defining the eras, but contextualizing it with the things that happen to really bring it to life helps us to have a deeper understanding of what the other side of the Janus cone might potentially look like. And so this is an example of the historical side of a Janus cone. So you've got your topic, your central question with your systems assessment and boundaries, and most importantly, your categorized forces of change. And the challenge is to look backward to see forward. And so you've got the opportunity to look at each of those categories and do an assessment for each of them across time, right? And with the goal of sort of blending and synthesizing them into a singular Janus cone assessment. But the idea here is that you really want to have something that is tightly aligned and synthesized with your topic framing so that it really brings it to life. So the goal would be to take your 3, 4, 5 categories and do some historical mapping on each of them, and then try to bring those together into one cohesive Janus cone eras and transitions assessment. And that is where we're looking to go with this, right? So for the workshop, here we go, right? I want for you to, and even if your force field assessment is not complete, you should have a good understanding of what the categories are and that sort of thing. Use that as a springboard to help you populate the aspects of your historical assessment. Map the timelines that align with your force field assessment, which aligns with your system boundaries, which aligns with your central question, okay? And then use the Janus cone to visualize and articulate the relevant triggers, transitions, and eras that go along with it. And again, the idea here is there's no singular approach. Each and every one of these will look different. But one thing to keep in mind is that your timeline map, however you bring it to life, is a required attachment for your current assessment, right? So Appendix 1 is your force field assessment, and Appendix 2 is your timeline map, and that is part of the assignment that needs to be attached to the back of that. So that's what we have. I think it'll be a great workshop, and by the time you finish with the workshop, you should be well on the way to finishing up your current assessment, which is due Friday. So we'll see you at the workshop. Have a great day.